10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 132. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. What's going on? How are you? Hope you've had a great week and hope you're ready to buckle down and learn something new here. So before we get into the episode, just wanted to mention that you can grab all of the PDFs to every single episode we've ever done here at the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, which adds up to 132 PDFs, which is pretty awesome. You could get those by going over to our Patreon page. You can do that by heading over to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, and clicking on one of the Patreon links. You know, we know you want to get better here at the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, and the best way to get better is to have all of these PDFs in your possession. Take, for instance, one of my students, Mike. He has a binder that he has literally printed out every single PDF we've ever done and put it in this binder. And it's a great resource where he can just kind of flip back through that, work on something that he needs to. If a problem presents itself to him in a certain tune or something like that, he literally has a reference of all these materials, which is amazing. And you know, we put out a lot of information on this show, and it's not required of you to learn every single lesson every single week. In fact, it's probably going to be pretty close to impossible to do that. So your best bet is to grab all the materials and keep them filed away somewhere so that you can use them when you need them. Okay, so let's get into today's episode. Today is going to be part 2 on our diminished pattern that we learned last week. And let me explain why I did a part 2 on this. One of the things that I'm really going to try to do from now on is do a better job of showing you how to practically introduce this material that I'm showing you into your playing. So I'm going to be doing a lot more things like etudes, where I'm actually putting the practices into action and giving you a concrete example, something that you can use in your next solo, a place to put them in a common tune, where I would actually think about these concepts and how I would actually execute them. So that's exactly what we've done today. What we've done is we've written an etude over 2 choruses of a B-flat blues using the pattern that we learned last week. Now, if you haven't checked out that pattern, go back and listen to episode 131, and you'll see exactly what we're going over here. But just as a quick recap, what we're really looking at is a pattern that John Coltrane is credited with coming up with over a dominant 7 flat 9 chord using the diminished 7th chord over this. So 1, sharp 9, sharp 11, and 13. And the relationship that he came up with was using all these chord tones and then using a note a whole step below these chord tones to come up with this really, really excellent sounding pattern. But again, go back and check out last week's episode if you don't know what I'm talking about or you need a little bit more guidance with this, okay? So why did I use the blues? Well, the interesting thing about the blues is that I consider there to be 4 points of tension available to us in the blues. And I'm going to go into this more deeply in upcoming podcasts, and this is actually going to be the topic of an advanced blues course that I'm writing right now that will be available at some point, not even sure yet. But there are 4 points that we can use tension that we see a 5-to-1 relationship in the blues. And that is measure 4, then again in measure 8, and then again in measure 10, and in measure 12. These are all the places where we see a 5-to-1 cadence. So this makes it a perfect place to explore some of these concepts that use tension and use a 5-to-1 cadence as an opportunity for tension and release, because really that's what music is all about, tension and release. And that's what our playing should really kind of be centered around. So what I've done is, in those measures that I previously mentioned, I'm using some of the patterns from last week or some other patterns that I've come up with that are related to this note relationship we talked about. and really just tried to put them in real life how I would actually use them. So one of the things that I'm doing is outside of these measures, I'm playing very inside the changes. And I think that the juxtaposition between playing very inside for most of the time and then playing very outside of the changes for part of it is a real kind of recipe for success on a larger level. So you can take that from the etude. You'll notice that most of it is very easy to play. They're lines and ideas that should make total sense to you. They fit with the changes really perfectly. And then I'm juxtaposing that with this pattern that is pretty outside. I mean, we're using a lot of altered notes to make this pattern work, as we know are contained in the diminished dominant scale that we've gone over so many times on this show. So that's one way to look at it, and that's one way that I actually structured it. And then another way to look at it is that you'll notice on the sheet, every time I get to one of these measures that I was talking about, the chord symbol that I have written above measure 4, measure 8, measure 10, and measure 12 has a flat 9 in it, because that's really the chord that we're dealing with, right? When we substitute these altered tones that we're using in this particular example, we're thinking about a dominant flat 9 chord, because that is where all of these tensions are appropriate. And I'm fairly certain that that's what Coltrane was thinking about when he came up with this pattern. So we want to notate them as a dominant flat 9 chord. Now remember, even if the rhythm section is not playing that flat 9, if you're playing with a good rhythm section, they should hear it and they should start to substitute some of the chords that you as the soloist are inserting in these particular places. And even if they're not, it's not the end of the world. But really, any good rhythm section will start doing this. And if you are a rhythm section player, you really want to start to listen and react to the soloist in this fashion. So those are a couple of sort of explanations of what you're going to see in this particular etude. Now let's actually listen to it, hear what it sounds like, and I want you to pay attention to those measures. If you've got the PDF, listen to it once without looking at it, and then listen to it again while actually observing the notes on the page and really seeing what's going on with the vocabulary as it's going by. Let's check out what the etude sounds like. So you can clearly hear that I'm using that every single opportunity that I possibly can. And I just want to remind you, I know I always say this when I write an etude, but it is important to realize that this is an etude that's trying to accomplish a goal. So I'm not going to go as heavy on this particular sound as I do in the etude in my normal solos. But it's a great way to get it into your playing. And when I'm practicing, it does sound like this a lot. So let's talk about maybe one or two other notable things in this etude. You'll notice in measure 21 that I'm actually using this diminished sound over the 2 chord. And that's something that I've talked about a little bit in the past. I'm probably going to make a couple more episodes about it in the future. Thinking about a 2-5-1 as only a 5. So playing the tensions that I would normally play over a 5 chord, but doing it over the entire thing instead of actually waiting until the 5 chord. And that's a great way to build even more tension. And you'll notice that I do that in the long 251 in the second chorus of this etude. So if you're trying to figure out why I was using it a bar early before that concert F7 flat 9 chord, that's exactly what I was doing, just trying to build the tension a little bit more. All right, so get on this etude, make sure you study it. And here's a great idea for everybody. After you've studied this etude, write your own. I think that that's a really important thing. Practice it in action, practice the actual act of improvising while using these sounds, but it's also really important to sit down and think more slowly and execute something exactly in a way that you might be able to not do on the fly. I think that writing etudes for ourselves is a great way to do that. I make my students do it all the time, and more often than not, it really benefits them. Okay? So I'm going to have the etude in C instruments, B flat instruments, and E flat instruments on the Patreon page. And I'm also going to include the play along that we used in this episode. So go and get your hands on that by visiting the Patreon page if you're not a member. It's a great reason to sign up, not to mention some of the reasons that we talked about at the beginning of the episode. And it's literally less than a cup of coffee every month to get all of this stuff. All right. Hope you enjoy. Send me any questions you might have. 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com, and we will talk to you soon. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye.